Sure. Well, I mean, there's a million ways that this happens, and many of them are extremely significant but distinct from each other. So I could just give a little assortment, I guess.
Hmm.
So one of the things that motivates almost all of us, unless we're like profoundly, on the most disassociated side of the autism spectrum, is that we live for social validation. I'm a narcissistic personality type. I admit that throughout my writings. I want that validation. And so if you think about, say, some kid growing up in a inner city area, and it's all about trying to get the approval of peers. But the thing is that this kid's peers, the approval is all based on macho and showing that you're the tough guy. And every second of every day, you're straining to try and prove that. And now you become part of a street gang, and the way you can get initiated into this brotherhood of guys that have a tremendous rep, and that, people get out of their way when they walk down the street and all that kind of stuff, is you have to, for example, kill somebody that's completely innocent, or total random shooting or something like that. And that seems like it's necessary because it's getting you this thing that you've been striving for all your life. Other people grow up where it's all about money, and anything that you can do that's possibly going to increase those digits in your checking account that are so vital for all these things. Maybe you're in debt, you want to support your family and so forth. I mean, just like, in the mafia, they'll kill somebody and say it's not business, it's not personal, it's business, or something like that, or it's business, not personal.
Hmm.
And so many different things. It's what we would call overdetermined. So, for example, that inner city kid, another factor that's going on, recognized by anthropologists, they call it male protest behavior. In any culture where there tends to be an absence of fathers, like there is amongst a lot of African Americans in the inner city who tend to be raised by mothers and grandmothers, then the psyche can't escape being enclosed by the feminine, and it reaches for what's called male protest behavior, which is sort of an extreme, immature, masculine acting out. It's everything we would call macho and like street violence and so forth. It's a form of toxic masculinity that's done to try and separate oneself from all these feminine figures. And so that's another factor, that can be shown statistically by studies of cultures, and how much mature male figures are around and how much they're absent. And we even with families where there are father figures, we've just gone through a long period of time where fathers like Homer Simpson on TV shows and so forth are almost always portrayed as ineffectual buffoons.
Hmm.
And if you think about the 1950s TV show Fathers Knows Best, I mean, it just seems like a transmission from an alien culture at this point. And so then there are a lot of absent fathers who are distracted by workaholism or whatever. And so you have that factor. And then you also have a giant factor called psychopathy, where 1% of the population are psychopaths that don't have conscience. And those people tend to ride, and I've written extensively about that, they tend to rise to positions of power, especially in finance and politics.
Hmm.
And then they can create a culture of psychopathy because psychopaths who are more rational, it's not a mental illness, they're more rational than the average person. And their numbers are thought likely to increase somewhat because they're more male than female, they're more heterosexual than the average population. So they're much better at impregnating women because they abandon partners with ease, and they have this kind of like alpha charisma about them,
Hmm.
and winning confidence and so forth. And so they're good at passing their genes on. There is a certain genetic correlation, like when they do identical twin studies, about on a par with the genetic correlation of schizophrenia with identical twins. And these folks are brilliant at getting into positions of high power, which can be like at the top of a clergy hierarchy, for example, and politics, and especially high finance. And I mean, this is what's really gone on with the global financial meltdown, is that this had to do with psychopaths, and psychopaths create a culture of psychopathy. So there are certain like male-dominated worlds, like the world of soldiers in battles in some cases, male locker room situations. The floor of a stock exchange is just often described as a high testosterone war zone. You get a bunch of males who may not be psychopaths in such an environment where there's a culture of psychopathy, and they act like psychopaths while they're in it and may feel terrible after. We saw a great illustration of this in the Oliver Stone film, the original film, Wall Street, where we had a man named after a reptile, Gordon Gekko, played by Michael Douglas, who is just a perfect psychopath. In fact, one character described him in what was almost a perfect one-sentence definition of a psychopath. He had an ethical bypass at birth. And he uses the language of warfare and extreme violence. I want every orifice of his body flowing red, lock and load. We're going to, and so forth when he's talking about hostile takeovers of companies. And the person who falls under his spell is a young guy named Charlie Sheen, who does have a conscience. And he's named after a mammal. His name is Fox, Bud Fox, I believe. And he falls under the spell of this culture of psychopathy, but after a certain point, his conscience kicks in, and he tries to take down the reptilian psychopath. So this is another factor, is that you can create a culture of evil. And so people are doing this for many different reasons. You talked about how people want to uphold or people want to conserve their ego identity. And so they may cling onto illusions and do things that may be quite evil, but are part of an ego identity that they've glamorized. Well, I think when it comes to something as basic to the human experience as darkness, the answer to any attribute or anything you want to say about what might be causing it that's reasonable, the answer is always going to be yes, all of the above, plus many other things, because it's what will not be true, though, is that we'll find like a single cause or a single reductive explanation, because this is something that's overdetermined. So many different things play into it. So yeah, fears can play into it. A fear of being socially rejected. It can be a fear of a loss of power. A lot of people forget Alfred Adler, but there was once a triumvirate of the great psychiatrists, Jung, Freud, and Adler. Adler is the most forgotten one, but he came up with a lot of the ideas like inferiority and superiority complex, though Jung had some things to say about those too. But his psychology was based on the power principle. And so people have a fear of loss of control, loss of power. When people have a damaged eros, and they are unable to really tap into love, then as Jung once said, where the love principle recedes, then power principle ascends, and where the power principle, you kind of need the power principle to greatly recede before love can enter. And so a lot of people are driven by power. People may be driven by desires, and from some points of view, like of the I Ching, you can see desire as a derivative of fear, if you want to. Because it can be the fear of the ego that it won't get what it needs except by manipulation or coercion. And by the way, if you want a good, somebody suggested this to me recently, if you wanted a good one-word operational definition of evil, it'd be hard to find a better one than coercion. So many things cause people to want to manipulate and control other people. Some of it is fear, but some of it is also just a lust for power. Like a lot of people will conventionally think psychopaths are like seeking power and are high on themselves out of fear or insecurity. Actually, in their case, it doesn't seem to be true. They're just genuinely feel great about themselves. And also people with narcissistic personality disorder, which is a much rarer and more serious thing than a narcissistic personality type. But people think Steve Jobs was an example of this. They can almost border on psychopathy, and they're not afraid. Psychopaths are great as like fighter bomber pilots, and they're also great as surgeons because they're like the Iceman type. They can be completely cool under pressure. They may not feel anything like the conventional forms of fear, and indeed they don't feel a lot of the conventional emotions, but proto emotions like frustration and anger and excitement and this kind of thing. So human beings are so various that we would be hard pressed to even come up with a really inclusive list of all the factors that go into their doing dark things or becoming dark personalities.